everyone. Welcome to my channel, formerly Spacepan, now the Antisocial Contract. If anyone's in the chat, as usual, if you can let me know how things sound, it's always appreciated. Let's see. Well, it looks like we have a few people hanging out here. I think one of them might be me. So yeah, I should be joined by Ashley in just a minute here. So, I think we are going to talk a little bit about what we did last week. Unfortunately, I had to take that stream down because I listened back to it and realized that there was a bunch of ambient extra noise, like all of my typing and everything. So, let's see, I just need to figure out how to avoid that this time. I think if I mute my mic in OBS, that would have solved it, instead of muting it just in Discord. Wait a minute. Oh, I just realized my push to talk is on. I don't know if anyone could hear me or not.
Hello.
I can't hear you. Oh, give me a second. I had my earbuds plugged in, but I had taken them out and I forgot to put them back in.
I see. So can you hear me now?
Okay, so apparently I can be heard whether or not I'm using push to talk, and that only applies to Discord. But the thing is then I realized I still would have to mute my mic when I'm not talking if I'm typing or anything. But okay, so I have this mic here. I'm going to try and use it. I was thinking I didn't need it, but I'm going to try now. But anyway, how are you doing?
I'm good. Had a bit of trouble with insomnia last night and the night before that, but was weird. Was like waking up every hour or every other hour and tossing and turning quite a bit, but I'm functional now. I need to go out and get some sunlight. That usually helps get things back in order. But yeah, I sometimes have these like random sleep disturbances with no apparent cause. It's irritating. What about you?
No, I'm irregular, but always the same way. I like to sleep in 2 4-hour chunks.
Yeah.
Which I think is normal.
That's very...
It's just not practical.
It's kind of weird.
I think it's healthy, but it's not
Yeah.
like everyday living practical. But I've been really fortunate because I've managed to find like jobs where it actually has been at least not entirely sustainable, but kind of close to it.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's some jobs that you can do in Korea that are suitable for like night owls, I think, because a lot of the Hagwons or whatever private schools for English, they teach later in the day, so it's good for people who like to wake up around lunchtime or 11 o'clock or whatever.
Yeah, and that's exactly the thing. That's what ESL gigs are like.
Yeah. Oh well. So, I've got are you live, by the way?
Yes. We started exactly on time.
Okay. Great. Yeah. So, you know the last stream, are you gonna re-upload it at some point? It's just it'll seem a bit strange without the context of the last stream if only this one is up.
That's the problem though. Like, it's really bad, and I don't know how to. I don't think there's any way I can edit it. Now, I realized had I remembered to record it on my own end on OBS, then I'd have like a perfectly good, clean version. I assume.
Yeah. Well, that's all right. I've got a summary of the
It could be
topics I
transposed.
was gonna.
It could be transposed.
Yeah. I've
And,
got
and
a
actually, it's,
little.
it's it's really
Well,
not
by
that long because it's maybe a 2.5 hour stream, but it's only maybe I think the first 90 minutes. But then there was also like a big gap
yeah.
where we had like a disconnect, and then we had to circle back.
Yeah, that shouldn't happen this time because I've had my Wi-Fi switched around a bit and it should be working better now. More consistent connection. Uh, and I don't need to use push to talk, I don't think, which is great because I've already got it switched off. It just that used to be really temperamental because sometimes I would speak and it wouldn't pick up my voice, so it would like clip off the ends of certain phrases and it would sound weird, but I guess that's a little perfectionist. It's not a huge deal.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, I've written something which is shorter than what I wrote last time. Short by my standards. And then we've got the diagrams, which I guess I could just paste into the main chat. And I don't know if you want to put them up on screen when when we get round to that. Could be interesting. Um, yeah.
Yeah, well, I have all those, so I can make sure I get those up. Before we begin, though, what's the tricky thing? What do you call this topic? Because it's like several things. The video you linked me about Pareto had to do with residuals. Is that what he called them? You have the funny word for them, and and how the elite cycles through
Um,
things. But that doesn't even seem to be really the main focus. Oh,
it
residues.
doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, but maybe organizational structures of the elite be something like that. I don't know. Is that about accurate? I think that
Yeah,
kind
I
of
mean
covers
that.
it.
Yeah,
Anyway, so yeah. Um, the other day I was listening to a podcast with James Lindsay, and he's one of the authors of the hoax papers that got sent round to intersectional left academic journals some years ago. Was it 2019 or I'm not sure, but
no, I think it
he,
was earlier than that. That was what Helen Pluckrose, him, and then a third guy.
yeah, yeah, I
Yeah,
forget who
dude,
the
Helen
third guy
Pluckrose,
was.
she's been starting some shit online. I mean, not really.
I
I'm just
don't
like
follow
she's
her.
had some hot takes, is all I'm saying. Her name pops
Oh,
up, and
I
it's
see.
always like some spicy take.
Yeah, well, James Lindsay, the other day I was listening to this thing and interview, he kept going on and on about woke ideology and the fine details of it and how it relates to French postmodernism and this and that. And it just seems that people like him are wasting a lot of energy on something that's relatively unimportant because idea, uh, ideologies only matter in as much as they can spread, and they only spread if they're being promoted. And promotion can only go so far depending on the society that you're in and the nature of it. It's hard to market uh, moral universalism to Arabs, for instance, because that just isn't something that's in their nature, and that's why the Middle East, especially countries like Iraq and Afghanistan, are so sectarian and have all these weird micro civil wars, which Western people struggle to understand. And that ultimately relates back to the tribal family systems in those cultures and inbreeding and so on. But that's like a tangent. So, what kinds of people are susceptible to hostile ideologies? Why those ideologies are promoted? How did it come to dominate the cultural discourse of elites in Western culture? What mechanisms do the elite operate through, etc.? I think these are all much more important questions than trying to nail down some particular aspect of transgressive ideologies. And the role of power is consistently underestimated because the character of a society is determined by its elites as opposed to the masses, which is why most so called revolts of the masses in history actually incorporated sections of the middle class and even the nobility in some cases, such as in the Russian Revolution. The elite set certain social standards, and then the masses acquiesce, whether they actually believe in the elite's religion or not. So Enoch Powell is an of someone who tried to buck the trends that the elite were setting with immigration laws in the 1960s, and he had massive public support behind him. But active resistance from the public effectively evaporated as soon as it became apparent that Powell's career was over and the elite were not going to tolerate any dissent to the policies that they'd set in motion. And most people just blindly follow the social norms that are handed down to them by the state, the media, mass corporations. They sort of outsource their morality to those people, or to those entities. And even among the people who don't, more contrarian people, there are complications. So Brandon Adamson has written an entire book documenting the history of federal informants in online mass movements. And if there's one thing that's abundantly clear from reading that book, among all the other evidence that there is for this, of course, is that most people just wait to be led, and you really do have to just lead them around like lemmings, and if you don't, your enemies will. At least that's the course you have to take if you're a populist.
What's the name of that book?
Whether or not populism is...
That sounds like it'd actually be, I mean, at times a little bit kind of funny, but also kind of scary.
It's The Rats of Nationalism.
Okay, I know I've heard of it.
Yeah. If you go into our private DM chat, have a feeling you don't always read the walls of text I send you. But yeah, like, I've sent you my copy of it. Like, I helped, I edited it for him. Yeah, it's a really good read. It's short, and he has a very engaging style. Can you see the link I sent?
Oh, let me see. Is it to one of the diagrams?
No, it's just in our DM chat. It's the most recent link I posted, I think.
Oh, this one here. Okay, yeah.
Yes.
I thought you meant something. Okay.
Yeah. Probably shouldn't post it below the video, but anyhow there. So it's there to read it if you want to. Do you want to read it? I don't mean now on the stream. I mean like in your own time.
Yeah, I think I will. I haven't read a book in a really long time.
Yeah.
Might feel good to read a book again.
Yeah, he writes with a really fun conversational style, and Brandon's knowledge of these things is encyclopedic. He's had an online presence in the kinds of circles that I move now, as like going back to the early 2000s. So, yeah. And I think it's also important, just getting back on topic, not to get too hung up on individual events, because it's natural to want to focus on individual events like the Hart-Celler Act, for instance. But ultimately, I think all roads seem to lead back to questions about the elite and their interests. Who benefits in the elite from demographic change, just as an example, and all the other consequences of progressivism. Obviously, there are a lot of different avenues of political power: the media, academia, military, the state, just to name a few, and all of those are obviously important, and it's arguable which one really gets the deciding vote on social norms and actual law as well. But I think increasingly the biggest player is woke capital, some people calls it, certain mass corporations, and I think most importantly the tech companies. So the 2000s are widely acknowledged to have been something of a dead zone culturally. Was a very bland decade, even though there were things going on in it which seemed important, like the Iraq War. The 2010s were when certain central components of progressive ideology went mainstream, instead of just being the preserve of the academy, like critical race theory or patriarchy theory, standpoint epistemology, and so on. And ideas from those ideologies and theories now penetrate into every aspect of public discourse, whether people are aware of it or not. So most people haven't heard of critical race theory or patriarchy, but they're familiar with at least some of the ideas. And that's true now in terms of the social influence and reach of those ideas in a way that it wasn't even, say, 15 years ago. And I think this began on the internet and in the media companies. So you can look at the frequency with which news articles use terms like racism, white privilege, and patriarchy started to increase in the 2010s. And it's not ridiculous to ask whether this was connected to movements like Occupy Wall Street. Leftists went from saying hang the bankers to saying hang white people, sponsored by those same bankers and speculative capitalists in many cases, who benefit from this because it acts as a kind of diversion, essentially, is the narrative. And moreover, as we discussed last time, mass corporations have a natural bone to pick with nativism, and to see boundaries like race, sex, nationhood, etc., to see those things liquidated so that they can continue to expand their operations and accumulate capital, endless growth, basically. And they also need supporters. They need a way to produce loyalty. In a conventional aristocracy, that's easy enough because it's literally a ruling family. So if there's a dispute about who inherits or whatever, then at least you're related to each other. So bio-Leninism serves that purpose because it gives groups that have a bone to pick with mainstream society, the coalition of the fringes, that's what Steve Saylor calls it. It gives them an easy ticket to social status by granting them access to what I'm calling the managerial class in, for instance, HR departments and such like. And this is attractive since humans naturally want their grievances validated, and they naturally take the path of least resistance. So it's not necessarily that these people, like sexual minorities, transsexuals, ethnic minorities, it's not that they have no other way to gain status, although that is true for, I think, many of them, low IQ minorities especially. But it doesn't have to be the case. It's just that it's the easiest way for them to acquire status and social acclaim and so on. So this managerial class is a successor to what you might call the petty bourgeoisie. We talked about this. And these two classes of people have an adversarial relationship because once an organization reaches a certain size and complexity, the operations, most of them, of mass corporations get outsourced to professional managers. And then since the economic niche of mass corporations is something pretty recent in history, those managers and their superiors, CEOs, the CEOs of those companies, who are usually billionaires or centibillionaires in some cases these days, they become the new de facto elite caste, both the managers and the higher-ups in the companies, while the petty bourgeois are then demoted to the middle class. The bourgeois elite, that's what Sam Francis called them, they get demoted from an elite status to the status of being middle class, and thus away from the levers of power. And the managers of huge international companies, by the nature of the job, they tend to be a highly selected variant of Machiavelli's fox archetype. So basically they're intelligent, but they're also quite cynical, manipulative, focused on the present, place very little stock in group loyalties, except insofar as they can use other people's group loyalties to enrich themselves, and they generally aren't cut out for violence, per se. And by contrast, small and middle business people tend to be more like Machiavelli's lions, so they generally have conservative impulses, they accept the reality and the practical importance of group identities, and they usually tend to praise what they would see as the just use of force. There's
Yeah,
another
like a
way
lot
you
of
can
like
choose to
hero
look at it,
worship culture and that kind
which
of
is
thing.
sorry, go on.
Like hero worship culture and
Sorry.
that kind of thing.
Yeah. So
But
there's also
this was something
another
that I was
way
actually
of
kind of skeptical of, just because like the way I heard it worded was that like that there was some kind of threat of this class like doing some kind of violence, but it seems applied to like the like America right now that would not be the case in general.
well, actually, yeah, I'll get onto that. They're not going to use violence per se, but they are going to use something else, which I'll get to. So an alternative way that you can choose to look at it is Wilfredo Pareto's typology, where he talks about residues, which to my mind basically just means phenotypes or personality types. This is a tried and tested way of looking at society. Can be a little bit pretentious at times, but basically you have all these different strains of humanity that perform different sorts of social functions. So you have your nymphomaniac receptionists or salespeople or whatever, and you have OCD people to be account managers and what have you. So Machiavelli's foxes line up with what Pareto would call the class 1 residues, or the class 1 phenotype, and they have the characteristic trait which is they're obsessed with the use of combinations. And his use of this term combinations is a little bit weird, but I think I have a decent good idea of what's meant by it. I think it basically means formulas.
Or like
They're obsessed with
schemes.
formulas. Yeah. So rather than advocating force per se, they think that just like any problem can be solved by implementing ever more complex managerial formulas, or to settle all disputes through various agreements and whatnot, or if not that, then through basically directly manipulating people and gerrymandering their behavior. And the scary thing, well, I'll get to that. So cultures outside the West evolved with different family structures, and I think it enabled them to. I think that family structures influence the selective pressures. So the kind of people that do well in a certain kind of family environment are more likely to pass on their genes in that society than a society with a different arrangement. And so cultural elites outside the West evolved with different structures, and I think it gave them ways that they could theoretically limit or diffuse the power of the managerial elite, but we don't have those in the West. So there's two things that come to mind. One of them, in countries that have authoritarian family structures, for instance, you see military dictatorship as something common, or, well, South Korea even was a military dictatorship until 87, 1987, I believe. And so this way of doing it is just that you have the state to act as a buffer to managerial interests and whatnot, like China, because in China the state has its own ideology and they're concerned with the ethnocentric interests of the Chinese people, and obviously so are Huawei and so on. Or the other way of doing it, which is more interesting in my opinion, is family business, so to speak. Family business does exist in the West, where, okay, so the way this works is that instead of having managers, you basically just fill the senior ranks of the company with your family, chaebols or something in the South Korean case. And it's not that family businesses don't exist in the West, it's just that for whatever reason, it doesn't seem to scale to the level of very large international conglomerates like Samsung, for instance, which is a Korean company. The drop off rate or the conversion rate of family business to managerial business, so to speak, gets stronger and stronger the larger the company is in the West. Whereas in Asia, this doesn't appear to be the case. Asia's corporate landscape at the highest levels is completely dominated by family-owned firms like Hyundai and, well, I can only think of Korean ones. The Evergrande Group, that's a Chinese one, I think, and so on. And we don't have anything like this in the West, not at the higher echelons. Now, the reason I think big tech are probably the most important players, and this is what comes back to what you were saying about violence, is because they are uniquely, more than anyone else, in a position to implement what basically amounts to a form of mind control. So Facebook is currently in the process of building an AI, which is going to, I mean, they'll deny any knowledge of this or that they're going to do this. They'll say it's unethical, but realistically, it's not like anybody's going to hold them to account because they just have so much wealth and so much power and resources. They're never going to be held to account for it, and they also work with NSA and other organizations in the US state who benefit from their technologies. So they're going to create an AI which will essentially absorb all of the text from the enormous corpus of text that they have on Facebook, probably in both public and private communications, because it's already the case that they can flag private communications for insensitive content, quote unquote. So they already have some kind of automated system that scans private communications in case you post a naughty link to a BitChute video or something. And then that AI is going to categorize text according to its content with the obvious endless possibilities for elite-sanctioned blackmail for people who oppose the establishment and all kinds of other unsavory practices. And in so doing, when they create that AI, they will also be able to build predictive models of the personalities of billions of humans. Advertisers already do this to a certain extent, but with a much greater precision, I think, than it's ever been done before. They'll build predictive models of the personalities of billions of humans, their users, to understand in just exquisite detail and with exquisite precision how to manipulate them and misdirect them most effectively. There's evidence that this has already been done. Some people claim that they've used techniques like this to influence elections with disturbing levels of precision, and I wouldn't be that surprised. And they're only going to get better at doing this as time passes. And this is why populism is a complete waste of time, because you aren't going to create a populist revolt against an omniscient AI, which has access to such massive reserves of personal data on human activity. The only thing you can really hope to do is find people who are already aware of these issues and then basically move towards separatism and or what is, I guess, sometimes called agorism, black market activities, trying to build up parallel societies and institutions outside of the elite's framework. So they aren't going to use violence per se, but they're going to use something that's possibly much more effective, which I mean, it sounds sensationalist, but it will be a kind of mind control effectively.
Right. Well,
So,
but that's the thing is this is the grand scheme of the so-called fox-like people, right? Their archetype.
yeah.
Right, and supposedly the lion-like people, that archetype is a little bit more. You said they celebrate violence, but also supposedly they're supposed to be more like willing to use it, right? Which in theory is
Well,
kind of what they
it's
need
not
to
that they,
do, but
I wouldn't
um,
say that they celebrate, I wouldn't say that they celebrate violence. I'd say that they celebrate what they would regard as the just or judicious use of violence. So I'm thinking of like, oh, guns rights type people. They're like that. So,
oh
yeah,
sure, sure. I was thinking that like a
yeah.
police, military. That I think that kind of falls into that category too,
Yes, them as
right?
well.
So, but I was actually compounding it by saying that I doubt these days that they'd be willing to use violence at all because that's kind of been the ongoing theme of conservatives, right? Is they just kind of peacefully protest and then go home peacefully and then nothing happens, and it's in stark contrast to BLM riots, and it's people, it's attractive for people to see it as a victory, but in terms of like actual, you know, getting things done, actual practical results, it doesn't seem to be a victory at all. But then the other thing was, even if they were to assemble everything like classically necessary to overthrow their system or to stop the elites, just the nature of this, I guess, Facebook omniscient supercomputer style of defense. Like I don't think there's anything you can really do that would outmaneuver that kind of thing. So I think, yeah, it kind of just leaves you with forms of separatism and agorism.
Yeah, I would agree. And that's
That's why I have this like ridiculous cartoon fox and lion up. I think it's a helpful visual. I can put up any of the diagrams when they're relevant. I had one up earlier, but I think you weren't at that part of it.
Oh, it's fine. Actually, hang on. I'll just. There were two in particular that I was thinking of as being especially relevant to this. I'll just post them in the main chat. Let's see. There's the one that I called Attempt 2, because it was, well, my second attempt at it. So yeah, there's that one. I've just posted it in the main. And then just for fun, there's this other one, which is the demographic breakdown. So this is basically my attempt to, I mean, this is probably glossing over a lot of technical details, and you can see I've got Zuckerberg's AI with a question mark after it, because it doesn't necessarily need to be spearheaded by him himself per se, but yeah, it should be maybe that the AI should actually be right at the top of the pyramid, maybe above the senior executives. But I think this is it, the structure of it, basically, in a nutshell. Can you see those?
Yes, got it up on the screen.
Yeah. So, this highlights the demographic breakdown one. You can see that so like the managers before, say, 20 years ago, I think it would be reasonable to suspect that most of these people were white. I guess you might call that sort of the legacy managerial population, I guess, if you want to use that term. But then more recently, there's been the push to, for bio-Leninist reasons that we've discussed, to hire women, various POC, Mishlings, sexual minorities, and so on, to then use those people as a bludgeon against the petty bourgeois middle class, who tend to be overwhelmingly white. This is something, well, and male as well. And the reason I know that's true is because it's something that leftists in America constantly kvetch about. The fact that most businesses in America, to the tune of something like 80-something%, if I remember correctly, are owned by whites, and male whites, usually. Small business and so on, and medium-scale business, I guess. So they use these people, the bio-Leninist hires, they use their racial grievance politics as a kind of bludgeon against the white middle class. And speaking of the middle class, I actually wasn't going to talk about this, but so in the Anglosphere, we used to have a tradition called Puritanism, and it's interesting because the term pure, well, you could think of Puritanism as kind of like it was an attempt to implement a really to implement the most thorough application of an existing ideology that was already, well, Protestant Europe, so was already endorsed by the elites. But they decided that they were going to create, well, what they would regard as the most superior and pristine, etc., application of it. And so Puritans, you could say that they were sort of like the vanguard or just the shock troops of the elite ideology, or a derivation of it, if that makes more sense. And there is an argument to be made that in the modern context, SJWs perform this same function in the elite that the Puritans did. So they, like Puritans, they tend to also be middle class. Middle class people tend to define themselves in terms of education and moral codes. They don't identify themselves because of their attachment to money, for instance, the way that either the upper class or the lower class does. And this is interesting because it explains why it's just another dynamic that explains why it seems to be difficult for people on the right to effectively mount any kind of pushback to progressive ideology, because the progressive ideologues, or what we usually just call the SJWs, the shock troops for a lot of that stuff, they see themselves as fighting against a group of people, the fascists or whatever they would say, who are deeply evil, not just wrong or misled, but actually evil. And it's an ideology which it has a sort of a grand narrative that you organize your entire life around, the sort of the grand fight against evil. Whereas on the right, there's nothing like this really. It's just sort of my taxes are a little bit too high. I would like them to be lower. Maybe they're not, or well, and they don't see their opposition as being fundamentally evil. And of course, I mean, it doesn't take a genius to work out whose ideology is going to have a competitive edge if one is effectively religious and they see themselves as fighting a crusade against moral evil. So
you're saying that these like modern day this like managerial class is similar to the Puritans?
No, not them per se. I'm
or I
not
should say
saying they're similar to it.
Puritanists, right? The Puritanists would be distinct from the Puritans.
Yeah, I wasn't talking about managers though. In that case, I was just talking about SJW.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Because SJWs, like, they aren't, I mean, they're usually middle class and they might have a role in these kinds of organizations, but they're usually not movers and shakers, so to speak. They're kind of just like the shock troops for a lot of that stuff. You could sort of see universities as being like proto-HR departments for these kinds of people to go into in global corp, like big tech and so on. So yeah. Was there anything else you wanted to add to this?
So then they'd be more in the green area.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mostly
and then one thing
clueless
too. Right, and then yeah, one thing too is I'd noticed that the manager section is like taller, which I think is appropriate because you're gonna have a larger proportion of the market actors that way too.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there is this issue of elite overproduction that a lot of people have complained about because of far too many people going to university. That's another example of bio-Leninism at work, affirmative action and so on.
Or like educational inflation, I think. That's what I would call that specific example.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about the affirmative action too is it was sort of like an inverted version of something you had mentioned earlier. This issue of like when universities have a quota, right? And then what ends up happening is people have these opportunities when they're underqualified, and then it actually just sets them up for, you know, some kind of debt and like the waste of their time, and it's like it's demoralizing, right? All kinds of reasons. It's like a horrible thing, right? So it's this, you know, tragedy of, I guess, good intentions, you could call it, which I think is very, very charitable. But that reminded me of, you know, this idea that, you know, the elites create these prospects, right, based on affirmative action. And then, of course, it's going to attract people who are, like, only qualified for that, but then you're going to have people who are qualified for more than that, but, you know, because it's creating this, you know, this perverse incentive, they're going to go for that. I suppose it's the same as welfare too. I suppose that's kind of exactly the same structure.
Yeah, welfare is part of, well, state managerialism, the massive expansion of the state since the year 1900. I mean, we talked about this last time, the fact that in 1900 it was possible for a British person to never interact with the state in their lives, which isn't really possible. Well, it's not possible now. The government has like 570 something different departments.
Yeah, and I wonder how you could arrange any kind of a. It'd have to be some kind of a mass secession, and you'd have to pick a place and have enough of a leadership that people, are generally going to agree upon, a basic common denominator of rules. Like, there's so many things that have to all be in place that can then all be like intercepted. And we've seen, the elites right now will clutch pearls over literally anything, even things that didn't even happen.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the conclusion to this is really, other than the fact that it's just kind of depressing. Yeah, like, I don't think populism's the answer anyway, because it's just people are too easily led. You need like a group of very high functioning people to just start their own society piecemeal. I guess you could see BitChute or those kinds of platforms as like a small scale attempt to begin doing something like that, just as an alternative to the major platforms. So,
hey Jay, Willie,
yeah,
nice to see ya.
Hello.
Fam.
So my thought on this here was like it's just amusing to me that somebody could start, from wherever on the political spectrum, and then maybe they get into some Mencius Mollberg and this kind of a thing, right? And then they end up at this conclusion that basically is agorism. And it's the same place you'd end up if you had, if you read Samuel Konkin, which there's actually someone on YouTube did an audio reading of I forgot what he called it exactly. I'll put a link to it, but it's fairly short. I keep recommending that one, but nobody will listen to it.
Like, fun fact when it comes to people like influences from political influences, I actually got most of my political influences. I didn't come up on my own. I actually got them from like watching your videos. I guess that's something.
No, I appreciate that.
That's cool.
Yeah, I really like those. Like, they're like very like useful when it comes to topic, right? It's very like. Then it's like I usually watch them because I understand it. Because the most useful video must be the ethic morality distinction, I would say, because like really like perfect.
Yeah, I should probably look into like what more classical philosophers say about that kind of thing, because it's been like a very long time. But mostly I find that like you basically end up with thoughts that are like formulated in maybe a little bit cleaner or more elegant ways, and then now you have a person to attribute it to. And I find that generally like you kind of get more out of philosophy when you just like try it yourself.
Yeah, like I usually try myself, and I basically say like I didn't have to read it. I just have to. It's everywhere. You just have to rationalize it. Then it was clear to me.
Yeah, like I think it's a balance. I think when people are studying that which is called philosophy, it's really the history of philosophy. And it's good to have that. It's good to have like a balance, right? But I think that for a lot of people, like there's a type of person that gets really, really, really into the history of philosophy, right? And then they're like a Plato historian, right? And then it's literally just this like like constant cataloging of things, and it's it becomes like a crutch where you're not really doing philosophy, you're mostly just doing like tedious cataloging in history,
Something that's very interesting when it comes to like human knowledge and history is that knowledge tends to start from one part and then people keep adding more things to it. And the reason I think most humans do that way is because human evolution works that way. So like, and this is something like there's a reason why a lot of religious people are retarded, because if they basically just see that, then there would be no like conflict between religion and science, but they just have to make the conflict when it's not naturally there, which is really, really dumb. I hope you see where I'm getting at, because I'm kind of vague.
I do want to just say hi to some of the usual people in the chat. It's nice to see some familiar people that we haven't seen in a while.
It might be fun to get Pilliter in because he probably has a take on this if he's being listening.
I have a take on one thing, if I might add it.
Well,
Sure.
Pillator, he's in my Discord, and that's how I'm doing it now. Is you just hop into the live voice chat. So definitely, if you want to hop in,
Oh.
if you're feeling up to it.
Before he do that, I used to like to say something something I realized when I watched the political compass, right? Especially with video about it, which is actually very good, right? Is that I basically have a very good label for the so-called corners in the two-dimensional political compass text, which is very like that compass is not really the most useful one, but like I basically if one see that, right, I basically call there is the libertarian right, and then the people the so-called authoritarian right should just be called the hypocritical right, and the so-called libertarian left should be called the hypocritical left.
Now, wait a minute. Are you including the Hoppians in the hypocritical libertarians?
Hoppians are consistent. They are like ANCAP or Mirren. I don't know if they're ANCAP, but they are consistent.
This is the thing. This is something that I have to I'm gonna have to get this cleared up because on my past videos I've attracted a lot of Hoppians, and I'm no longer so sympathetic, and I feel maybe I should make the case. I mean, in a friendly way. I'm not, you know.
Like
I don't understand what. I mean, Hopper's shtick was basically just anarcho-capitalism plus racism, wasn't it? Like,
No. It's this idea that like you can transition through minarchism into anarcho-capitalism, and it has to do a lot with building the right kind of society, and that there's no way with the state as it is to do that, so therefore you have to like do something, and then often it doesn't employ.
so he's like a gradualist or something, and you don't approve of that?
Kind of. Well, no, but it's also this expanding approval of beyond just minarchist style states to like ones that might impose things to try to craft the kind of society
I
you
agree.
need to create a public.
And it isn't.
And like I get the appeal of it. I understand it's very appealing from an ends justify the means standpoint, and you look at it and you're like, this clearly in theory could reduce suffering, right? You can see this utilitarian side to it, but at the end of the day, it's the same style of argument as any other statist argument, and it's just dressed up in a really, really attractive way, and we want it to be true because then it means that our politics get to matter, but our politics don't matter.
I mean, even setting aside the philosophy of it, it's like, well, I mean, for the million reasons we've just discussed, it isn't possible to work from within the system anyway. It's not feasible. Like in Britain, for instance, if you wanted to make a Hoppian political party, so you have to go through something called the Electoral Commission to be registered as a party, and the Electoral Commission are obviously on the side of the elite. It's a managerial, another one of these like managerial arms of the state, and if you, if your party manifesto doesn't align with doesn't align with certain guidelines that they've set in terms of ideology and so on, if you stray outside that, then they just won't allow you to be registered as a party. So yeah,
what are those guidelines? Because I had no idea that those existed, or what those would entail.
Well, apparently, so Mark Collett has a it's supposed to be a party, but they aren't allowing him to register, called Patriotic Alternative. You're not allowed to mention, I don't know, the existence of the British people, like the ethnic British, something like that, in your party
that doesn't
manifesto.
make any sense because the government law, the UK law, they like are slurring the native British people as white British, which is in my opinion a racial slur against native Britons, because the term native Briton is more respectful, and then they're mentioning that term but in a disrespectful way in government documents, so they're being hypocritical by not allowing you to do that.
Yeah, And they're trying to phase that out as well, like they have in several European countries, as in they're trying to get rid of uh, demographic markers on the census. So they just stop people from reporting their ethnicity on the censuses. So
Yeah,
that, yeah.
that's actually legal in France, but I want to say that to another live stream that's about just how shitty France is, because there's too much to just like, otherwise they're just gonna creep into every discussion we're ever having.
If you want to estimate the number of, say, Arabs that there are in France, or well, just Muslims, really, people from the Arab world and Pakistan, Bangladesh, those regions, you can't go by ethnic data because, like I said, the government doesn't report it. So you have to find interesting workarounds, like names, for instance, areas that have a high prevalence of the name Muhammad. Is a proxy that you can use, for instance.
Yeah, that actually makes sense. Because like people like can estimate when it comes to like France, and it's like also kind of problem for like other native peoples of France, right? Like it's very hard for them to even like say how many there are because they can't calculate. They can't like take data. It's like what the fuck, mate.
Jay
Yeah.
Willie, a couple minutes back, you were beginning a spiel, and I realized that I actually totally derailed that with the whole Hobbesian versus ANCAP thing.
Oh,
And you were
yeah,
talking about distinction between like principled libertarians and the non-principled ones, and we'll just table whether or not we'll table where the Hoppians go. They can be Schrodinger's libertarians.
like here's basically what I have about tennis, right? It's basically this. When I basically mention my ideas about what I think is like good to do, right? People just ask me if I am a Hoppian, if I read Hoppian, and when I say no, because people just say that what I say sounds like Hoppian ideology.
Okay, well I wouldn't worry about it now. But what was your main point?
Yeah, and that is that that in your video where you mentioned like that the up corner of authoritarian right and up corner of libertarian left doesn't really exist, and that makes sense, right? Because and that's why I just renamed the so-called authoritarian right as the hypocritical right. So the so-called libertarian left as a hypocritical left, because like it's very weird to say that somebody could be libertarian and also left. Like how can they have a more restricted market and still be more on the like that doesn't really make any sense. It's very like weird to even like yeah, to say that this distinction between right wing and libertarian is like clear cut, which it really isn't. And yeah, and that basically that's the reason why I call the two of the half of the quadrants on the two-dimensional political compass test are hypocritical quadrants. That's the hypocritical right, hypocritical left, and I'm thinking of where those would be.
I suppose an argument could be made. Instead of cutting off the corners of the political spectrum, right, you'd actually be folding them over. Because in theory, you could be making that trade-off, right, such that it's like balanced one way slightly the other or not. But it doesn't change whether or not it's hypocritical. But that kind of just occurred to me. But I suppose then you'd be in it would be a three-dimensional political compass at that point.
It actually makes
Oh,
sense,
and that
yeah.
instead of this three-dimensional, that makes mine better now, because that's how political science works and how political philosophy works. Is if you have the more complicated and more very nuanced diagram,
Yeah,
then you
that-
win.
By the way,
that makes sense.
someone in the chat was asking why we were talking about foxes and lions. So I'll just leave this here. It comes from Machiavelli. I've just posted a little thing in the main chat.
Plus, the picture I found was pretty cute. Yeah, let's
Yeah.
put it in the chat also.
Okay. Yeah, this
So I
channel
pulled
is,
up the. Sorry, what?
I was just gonna say this channel's great because we can literally talk about anything. Like I can't imagine any other channel, like even if I was friends with them, just being willing to discuss such a weird, eclectic selection of topics. But I can talk about basically anything on this channel. It's nice.
That's exactly the thing I like about this channel too.
So yeah, you were saying about this. Yeah.
Oh, I was just mentioning. I brought up the other chart that has the estimations of the racial breakdowns, which was tangentially
Gender,
related to
to a
the
certain
lessons
extent.
we were talking about.
Was it?
I guess tenuously, because you mentioned that you can figure out how many Arabs are in an area by the number of Mohammeds.
And then you like just need to factor in that other Muslim also name their kids Muhammad when they're not Arabs.
Yeah. Or just Muslims, basically.
Yeah.
Non-European
Yeah,
weird.
but also some of them are gonna give them like normal names, right? So I think those two things will offset each other.
But you can't still calculate, like, if you, for example, calculate about, like, you can say, like, what country their parents lived in before they came to this country, right? And the country you lived in before. Like, you can, like, go by that, because then you're not technically mentioning race or ethnicity, because you're just mentioning something very close to it, and you can just use it as an estimate, if that makes sense.
Isn't there a
Yeah, I
website
mean,
where
I
you can
really...
like port in two different kinds of charts and then see how they overlap to like look at correlation? Like I could do like a like John's per capita, right, over on a map, and then I could also pull their stats on, I don't know, like murder or whatever, and then see if there's a correlation on the density of Johns versus amount of murder. And then like you could create like an index of every single name and then rank names by how murdery they are, and then you could create a chart and a ranking like this for literally every crime.
Yeah.
And for like
But did you
mundane
say
things
John's?
too. Yeah, like if your name is John.
Oh, right, I thought you meant John's as in, like, the customers of prostitutes.
Well, I mean, if we had that data, I mean, that'd be a great chart too, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, I need to say something very interesting about the prostitution, why the mainstream left opposes it so much.
Yeah, but that thing I mentioned
Um,
exists, right? I think it totally does. No,
I mean,
do a
I
little chicka
think
chicka
I
see
know
if I can
why...
find it.
I,
Sorry.
I think I know why they're opposed to it. It's not political. It's to do with women's distaste for... I don't want to use the term low status because it's so loaded. Just unattractive men, basically, because they feel that prostitution benefits unattractive men, and they don't like
Yeah.
that. They only want the most attractive men to have access to women. That's actually why the whole sex positive thing, um, sex positive feminism, I think they're on course to abandoning that. I think most feminist ideologues are on course to abandoning that because it's too annoying for them, basically. It's too difficult to reconcile for their distaste for unattractive men because they dislike them so much. So they'll go with the more sex negative feminism. I think that's going to be the new in thing in the future. Apart from OnlyFans, they'll say that that's okay because then the women don't actually have to interact with men in real life to make money from them. But anything that involves real life prostitution, where the women actually have sex with the men, yeah, that'll be banned. They'll say that it's patriarchal and whatever.
That actually is true, but there's another element to it, which is actually something I realized kind of recently. Not recently, but a while ago, but I never really told anyone, right? And that was, I find that out because a man, he was interviewing a prostitute, right? And she was a Swedish prostitute, right? So therefore, like, she couldn't be open with her identity because in that country, if she's a prostitute, that means that if she had kids, they would be taken away, and the guy and whoever is like providing her, the landlord, right, would evict her because it's illegal to like house prostitutes, right? So it's like the life of everybody says that like prostitution is legal, but being prostitute is legal, but it's not legal to go to one. It's horrible to be a prostitute in those circumstances, right?
Yeah, it's the
Because
Swedish
that's what
model.
happens. But this is just going into like the thing I was going to mention about why they hate prostitution, right? And that is because that woman, she basically said, oh, they basically tell you the first day, no Arabs and no blacks, as a tip to the new prostitutes. right? But she basically had some clients that were black and Arab that she actually really liked. But a tip the prostitutes give each other is to be racially discriminatory because of experiences all the prostitutes have had based on race, right? And if you basically would have prostitutions, and they're gonna go against the leftist perspective of anti-discrimination laws, because if the prostitutes say, no, I don't want to fuck that person because of his race, right? And if she's employed, that's gonna fall under the anti-discrimination laws, and therefore they can't allow her to have sex with someone, to like deny sex based on that, but they can't force it on her either, because they say, oh, that would be rape culture and patriarchy, right? So the only thing they can do is to ban all prostitution.
Yeah, that's an angle to it that I actually hadn't thought of. I've heard similar stories from like New Orleans and stuff, I think, in the US. Prostitutes basically denying service to blacks for the same reason, because of negative experiences. Yeah.
Okay, but if this is a thing, then there has to be a group of SJWs that have, written a bunch of articles about it and give it like a catchy name, right, to try to brand it as an issue.
Almost
There's
certainly.
gotta be like a catchy name for something like this. Are you drumming? Is that a gerbil? What? Jay Willie, what is
it's
that?
not that
Oh, he's typing.
Oh, that's your
know
typing?
SJW
It's so
types,
basic.
they aren't-
Sorry.
Yeah. Well, they're not squeamish when it comes to talking about sex or whatever, but it is still kind of like a touchy area, I guess, of society. People don't really like talking about it, so that's probably why there hasn't been that much coverage of so-called racist prostitutes, I guess, if there hasn't been much coverage about it.
I mean, like, if they basically were to say to prostitutes they cannot to employ anti-discrimination laws on the prostitutes, then they would literally be raping them, and they can't like do, because they can't say, because our rape culture women is so terrible, right? And anti-discrimination laws is good, and if they have those two ideas at the same time, right, they must confront the idea that all anti-discrimination laws is basically just rape, and now it's very much clear. This is a very clear cut, right? But therefore they cannot go there. They need to like remove all of it, and to say it's all bad and all rape, because otherwise they have to admit that the idea of anti-discrimination laws is completely false, which it is.
And well, this reminds me of when I did the response to Deadhead animations, right? And he was he was an anarcho-communist, right? And he was talking about how sex work would theoretically work. That was his go-to example, right? He could have chosen anything, but I guess he has a former sex worker. You write about what you know, I guess. So he talks about how his hooker union is gonna work, and it was horrific. It was just a horrific, like, rapescape, awful proposition. Like, I just and yeah, that's what this reminds me of. Is anytime you make laws regarding this kind of thing, that's kind of exactly what you're setting up. I suppose this is a little bit of a goofy angle, but you know how feminists have tried to make like different forms of after the fact kinds of rape, right, happen a thing besides just regret rape, but also like if somebody lies about how much money they have, right, that kind of thing. You could in theory argue that, let's say somebody is illegally engaging in sex work, right, and then they're caught and the police take the money. And then, therefore, because the money is no longer in the exchange, now the sex is retroactively rape, and therefore the police caused the rape. And from that angle, you could argue that they have to just legalize all sex work.
But you make a lot of sense, so I have nothing to add to that.
I think that makes no sense. I think that's retarded, but...
Yeah, but I know they're retarded, but I didn't understand it probably much why. You said that you make sense when you make the statement that the sex work should be...
It may be an example of something which is, it's logically valid, right? But the premises are quite ridiculous.
And also, like, I would say this, I love that the fact that people can be very logical and have facts, right? They can be logically consistent with their facts and with their logic, right? But that doesn't mean that their facts and their logic is correct.
Yeah.
Like
Well, that's the thing too, is I just find that so many people, it's constant cop outs. There's this term we all know, thought terminating cliche. And it's occurred to me that maybe it's not getting used often enough. And I think that very much of how conversations go just end in like 1 to 2 step thought terminating cliches because it feels good. So that's naturally going to make up the bottom of the pyramid. I think that's just very human. Like like with SJWs and anti-SJWs, the majority of them, of these anti-SJWs, are unprincipled, right? They just kind of disapprove of the tone of the most recent brand of feminists, or they think that SJWs are very ridiculous and very cringe, right? But they're fine with pretty much everything up until the last like the couple of minutes of some compilation of clips they saw, right? And this is
Yeah.
why we're going to see this emergence among SJWs and feminists that champion the more sex negative route, I think. And it's going to be so frustrating because I think that a lot of the momentum and the popularity of anti-SJWism is just going to swing right back into new forms of feminism that are kind of like pseudo fake traditionalist, right? Traditionalist, but like polyamory is allowed, right? And no slut shaming and no OnlyFans shaming, right?
which is like super traditional.
Full
Right?
blown cuckservatism,
Oh my God,
dial
that is-
11 cuckservatism will be exactly as Face and LMS had depicted it. What is that, 1.5 years ago at this point, or last year at some point when he interviewed
What
that
did-
chick?
Yeah, Nama Cates. She interviewed him, but what did he say about it?
Oh, just his prediction of the future, where every girl has several. She has a harem of betas, right? Right.
Yeah.
And it's just this complete. Yeah. Like we just go full chimp. I think that's how they structure everything, right? The alphas fuck all the women, and then the women can each have their harem of betas. They all have their OnlyFans. And then and then eventually males will need female chaperones to be accompanied to go outside and then do public things.
Yeah.
But this actually was the reason why
Unless- Unless they're chads.
this is like a perfect example when you basically made all the time when your video made me influence my ideas, and that is when you say that that people always attack the feminist tone, right? But they don't like attack the facts, and if the facts would be correct, then their reaction is reasonable, right? And the people these go against the feminists, right? And then they always attack. They say, well, I think you're right in all these facts, but your conclusion is too extreme. What I mean, like, and that's the reason why your videos make so much sense to me, because like the problem isn't the tone, like, because like if you basically believe that that all human history have been just massive amount of misogyny and rape, and there's never been any bad thing for men ever besides like what they call toxic masculinity, which
Oh, looks like you cut out for a little bit
murder
there.
women basically all the day until like they change the laws, then they're like their reaction is completely reasonable.
Yeah, well, and then even consider this. Consider the ones who are like witches, right? Who deal in this like kind of goofy versions of like Wiccanism or paganism, where they think they're casting spells and they're tapping into nature and the divine feminine, and they're doing their rituals, and right, and they're wearing beads and shit, right? And they're all into this concept of like they have this divine internal divinity, right? And they're free bleeding and everything. Like now that's at stake, right? And the reason you're not a literal demigod, right? That can fly and and travel through time and shit, right? That there is because of the goddamn patriarchy. So yeah, like you would be a little bit outraged and ridiculous, right? Especially if you buy into it from that angle too. Not saying
Yeah,
that's all of them. I'm just saying that's also a contingent of the two. That's like especially fascinating, and I think those are a lot of the extra weird ones, you know.
But it's also like that's also one of the reasons why they never get anywhere with the feminists, right, in debates and stuff like that, right? Because they basically say that they basically give them all the facts and then just like say that their conclusion is too bad, right? But if you give them the facts, then there's no reason for them to change their mind, right? Like if they because like their fact is like wrong, they what they believe in like is not true. right? But if you still give them that is true, then then it doesn't really, you can't really get anywhere with that. Like you basically just blocked yourself in a way, like trapped yourself.
Right. So I look at it this way: if you criticize someone based on their tone, right? Like maybe their facts are wrong or their tone is bad, and then you say their tone is bad. Well, the only way you really know if their tone is bad is if you understand the point they were trying to make. And like maybe I don't know, their tone makes you not understand their point or something, like it's not sufficiently clear. But typically if you're judging someone saying, "Oh, this is cringe," you're too outraged or whatever, like okay, so you know the point they're making, and presumably you don't believe that their point is correct, right? Right, because if you did, the outrage would be justified. Like the overwhelming majority of people criticizing the tone are people who also disagree with the fact. It's just way easier to go for the thing that's obvious. But then the implication is that your tone determines whether or not something's true. And I don't know, like emergencies exist. Like they're you know there are reasons people might be quite passionate and say things quite firmly, or say things that are very unpopular, unpalatable. So yeah, it's an eternal contradiction just in that you have to understand the fact and disagree with the fact in so many of these cases, and then to intentionally go for the tone over the fact when the two are presented is it's a little bit cowardly, or maybe it's just lazy.
By the
Yeah,
way,
no, I would say that you're basically presenting it off at you as though you oppose or debunk them when you're actually not. And that's the reason why we have these like ignorant people like Hunter Avalon who can just change his mind immediately because he never disagree with the facts, or
I
not
mean,
really change his mind because nothing really much just changed. If that
did
makes
his mind really change on much?
No, not at all. That's my point because he
Sorry,
never
whose
just thinks
mind?
anything different. But that's
What?
why you can just get people to admit to something if they don't disagree with you already. They just disagree with like the tone.
Speaking of which, Derek, did you read my long expository spiel on your latest video? I was going to leave it as a comment at first, but then I realized YouTube would probably delete it, so I just sent it to you in DM. I wrote like 600 words or something about that video.
Yeah, okay, I read it at the time you sent it, and I see because you sent me the video originally, right? And
Yeah.
after I had watched the whole thing, I felt like I'd already committed to watching this thing, and I was like, I want to make a response video because the fact that her entire argument, the only tangible fact you can find in the whole goddamn thing, is her having to pay for her own rags, right? And then because of that, she takes her little step, her little baby step politically, and then because of that, she now has to like retransfigure her entire political landscape just to remain like socially acceptable to those around her, right? To stay in the best light, and that's the entire thing. So it's a spectacular like thing just to see unfold. but I thought for a second, oh, I hope I'm not gonna take the wind out of your sails. But I think that your commentary was it was a little bit different. It was a little bit less whimsical and more of the big picture.
I mean, I
But
guess
like
they-
actually, I I'm also kind of fascinated that you could like watch that without getting annoyed because like watching people like her, like those like people who basically, they're basically social convenience is more important than like the truth. People like that, like I basically respect them as much. Like they are the people who, if a woman was raped, right, and everybody and people knew that happened, right, but the rapist was a popular guy. Nobody cared about the victim, right. All the people who changed political opinions based on the climate, right, or because of fitting with social groups, they are literally saying that in that situation, the woman who was raped would be shunned by the same people. That's the reason why I can't respect them. And that I make that gendered way so that most people, gender-centric people out there, who would actually see this and how horrible it is to think that way.
Yeah, it's almost mandatory.
I mean, what
Yeah,
I
pretty-
was what I was saying, just in a nutshell, is that there's a tendency that seems to be particularly common among young middle class people, which is that they place an extremely high premium on moral codes and social causes, like the social cause of anti-racism, for instance.
Unconscious
But
bias.
but the thing is that because they are in an echo chamber 24/7, and progressivism is kind of just like the air they breathe. They never really, well, they don't need arguments to justify it to themselves or to anyone else because nobody's ever asked them to. And that's why any tiny thing that goes against the creed or even feels like it's going against the creed sends them into psychological turmoil because they've never been in a position to have to defend their ideas. And then obviously there was just the sort of the efforts she was going to recontextualize her experience, and she said bizarre things like anti-feminism is seductive or anti-feminism is attractive to women, which just seems to be obviously not true because none of her friends obviously were anti-feminists, and
Oh, no. What she
anti-feminism
said was
is
that because she's a woman, she's entitled to being anti-feminist. I think that's what she meant.
Because if she was a man, then she wouldn't like. Then she just thinks that men cannot have an opinion about feminism because it's about women, even though it's about taking away men's like.
See, the
literal
funny
human
thing
rights.
is that's the obvious implication, right? But I don't think she would dare state it in those terms, right? She would just prefer to state the positive angle. Well, of course, a woman should be allowed to have a position on either side of it. Otherwise, it's not real feminism if you can't be anti-feminist.
But actually, that's the reason why she said the same thing about tampon, because she's actually completely fine with admitting, without the clear word, that she just wants women to get things for free and men not. Because if you basically say that, if you admit this, I'm gonna have to get it from the beginning, right? You see that men and women have different body functions, right? And because they have different bodies, that means uh, that sometimes because body alone, the male body is going to have certain advantages and disadvantages, and the woman's body has certain advantages and disadvantages, right? So if she wants the government to pay for like her rags, right, because she's a woman, okay, then any form of male biological thing that would make it cheaper to live, that means that all the women, if I want to be a parent, right, and I'm not a woman, so I can get pregnant, that means that all the taxpayers need to support that I hire someone to be pregnant for me, right? But if she basically say no to that, right? But because I do it because of my gender, but she should do it because of her gender, then she's literally saying that no, sometimes women bodily function means that they have to pay certain things sometimes. That means that the government should pay for that because that's not fair. But when men have to pay for something that they can't do because they are men and not women, then they should not get it subsidized. And if you basically hold that position, then she's absolutely female supremacist. But she didn't really say that she didn't oppose the other thing, but I don't really think she would agree with it, if that makes sense.
I mean,
So
there's also like just the caricature of anti-feminism as well, like something like anti-feminists want women to not be educated and not go to university and be pregnant in the kitchen or something like that. It's just really like, I don't know, like, have these people ever met a person like that? I mean, it would be very strange if they had, because I haven't even, and I interact with people who are of a much more traditionalist mind. Like, I've never met any person who's actually like this. So, in
like I would say,
it's weird.
like if I was a woman, right, then I would probably just then like the idea of like just being at home and like having babies and not working would be like the heaven on earth. I'm sorry, and like the reason
I
why that
agree.
like and like and that's the feminists literally said no, that's not good enough in the past, I might add, where life for all people were harder, and they said that wasn't good enough, and they should take that away. Like the privilege people have to see that as oppression must be like literally living like a city of gold where you snap your fingers and everything that you wish for come true. Like the insanity of the privilege people have to be to see that as like being an oppressive state of being. It's absolutely the top 0.11% or 0.000, like keep saying that for a while, 1% of all humans that ever existed. Like the privileged people have to be that, to think that is like so insane that and there's so many women thought that way is proof that women, historically speaking, are and have been extremely privileged. They are the only people, besides maybe certain white people in countries who, well, not really, only women, that have basically said, oh, we have all this privilege, we're just gonna like, but we still feel oppressed, right? And then we're gonna absolve it, and now they have it worse. It's like so fucking insane, and it's like really, really funny to see, but it's also kind of sad. Like seeing that being at the top of all human existence as being oppression isn't that, like, that's actually kind of insane. And I think that you have to be there to see this that way, because if you think you have it better than only humans that ever existed, right? But you still like don't think it's good enough. You think it's oppression. That, like, the only reason because their life was so extremely easy, so good that they basically sought that.
Eric, you haven't spoken in a while. Speak. I'm just kidding.
No, yeah, well said. Well, I was fishing through what was formerly called the library, which I've renamed Chill and Discuss, because now it's just all the things in that one channel. But anyway, this thing 괅ᴏᴇᴇ had posted yesterday, it seems at least tangentially related to the topic we opened the stream with, as well as the one we've been talking about just now. Do
Wait,
you
you
guys see it
said
on
it
the
was
screen?
the
On the World
Discuss
Economic
area?
Forum?
Oh,
Yeah, that's now, that used to be called the library, but then I figure, well, let's just put it all together, because the channel, the Discord server got a little bit dead, so I think that means too many areas to post in, and a little too confusing.
yeah. Funding for female-led startups are accelerators, widening the gender gap. What does accelerator mean in this context?
I'm not sure. I
guess
wonder if that
that's
just
like-
means various forms of affirmative action, that all these different projects are backfiring in this way.
Probably.
I mean, could this potentially be like an elite scheme that's creating a feedback loop, right? That's actually useful for them, and that keeps a circulation, right? Because then they're going to keep finding the best of the best women that actually can cut the mustard, that very tiny sliver of that very edge of the bell curve, and then all the rest of the women are just going to get, churned out.
But that's the thing about companies like these Silicon Valley companies. They can actually afford to find the actually talented diversity hires through IQ testing or so on. I'm sure they do. Well, they won't call it an IQ test, of course, but they'll use some kind of standardized test to screen people and basically brain drain, I don't know, the smart blacks from black areas, or Latin Americans or whatever, or I guess women in this case. Although with women it's a bit more complex, I guess, because it's not IQ really is the main thing. It's more like personality characteristics, the kind of characteristics that are good for starting companies, I suppose. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, let's see. The subtext on it, or the subtitle opens with a stat that in 2019, only 11% of seed funding capital in emerging markets went to companies with a woman on the founding team, which
Only how many
seems like
percent?
11%. It seems like a narrow stat to me.
What does that mean?
Well, first of all, seed funding capital, I don't know, like
Oh, right.
how much of that represents like actual investment, right? And then a woman on the founding team specifically. Well, what about like I guess I don't really know much about it, but I imagine there are businesses, like I used to work for a company that the CEO is a woman. She's not one of the founders or owners though. There's two guys that founded it, and they decided like we're gonna put this woman in charge, and she's the CEO, right? But that would be
right.
but that would be counted as like a 100% male dominated thing, even though it's all women in charge. The entire upper management is all women.
I think I know why they did it that way. I think they put it in the way to show, like, they basically took every aspect: the CEO, the funding members, the ownership, right? And then they selected the one with the least of women, right? and then they just went with that to portray the false narrative that women are so much underrepresented.
Was it basically just kvetching about, like, I don't know, the prospect that investors are nervous about investing in female-led companies? I mean, I could imagine that being true, to be honest. But
Yeah, it just seems like that's the focus of this article. It's on the kind of financial side.
I mean, the thing is that it does seem to be true that a lot of female CEOs in the biggest companies are kind of like, I mean, there was this famous case of one that essentially sued her way into her position, and just like,
What a con.
yeah, affirmative action CEOs going under as a result. The companies being bankrupted soon after. There were cases of this happening.
Oh, no.
So I don't know. I wouldn't be
No, wait,
surprised
I
if
thought this
investors
was like, never mind.
took notice of that.
I would guess that a lot of people speculate downward when companies are taken over by women.
Yeah. I mean, there'd be a really easy, anybody who's skeptical about women, the efficacy of women in leadership, and there'd be a really easy way to demonstrate this, for better or worse, like in the private sphere, would be discrimination by companies, so that you could have a company with a gender discriminating hiring practice or leadership practices, and then you could see which companies fared better. I don't know. Of course, that's illegal, and I think even if you were to implement something like that, most men,
I can't hear any more shit. My computer is sad.
most men probably wouldn't go for it. Wouldn't like it, I don't think, because they want to please women, basically. As far as government goes, it's an interesting question. I think female leadership in government is bad when they're affirmative action hires. So, like, these Scandinavian governments, what is it, Finland, that, like, the parliament's all full of women, and they're so
I'm busy right now. She did good, okay? Yeah. 100%.
Oh dear. Yeah, so with women in government, it's like there was that case in Finland where they affirmative actioned a bunch of women into the position,
You
and that's
guys hear me?
obviously bad. Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you. I can hear everyone. Did you mess your audio up or something? Maybe he just has to hop in and out. I guess if he can't hear us, I guess I'll send him a message in the chat. But yeah, you can go ahead.
But anyway, what I was leading up to is that I'm not convinced that female leadership in government in general is worse than male leadership. Because if that were true, then it seems that we wouldn't be in the position that we are politically in the West. Most of the change, for better or worse, over the last however many years, like, has been under the watch of mostly male politicians. So yeah.
Yeah, and I'm always willing to hear the argument that, like, just men's capacity to simp is alone gonna outweigh any perceived disadvantages of having women. That's always like there's always the simp question or the simp threshold in every context.
Well, no, like, it's not even that. It's more just like, if the United States government was if it was 100% male right now, do you think it would be any less dysfunctional? I'm speculating no, is basically what I'm saying.
No.
Yeah. And the same goes for voting as well. Voting is kind of like... Now I can hear my own voice on J. Willie's end. Okay, now he's gone. And now he's back. Hello, J. Willie.
Hello. Sorry, my just stopped hearing you, as I just logged off and then in again.
Yeah, so voting is kind of like an illusory power because the most important issues were never voted on or never get voted on, really, for better or worse. It's all just like these behind the scenes technocrats and elites. They're the ones who really decides what happens and what doesn't happen. The voting is just kind of irrelevant in that respect. And what else? Um, it's like if you're gonna
Hey,
say,
Jay Willie, can you switch your thing to like push to talk?
Oh no, I actually stopped typing now. It's fine.
Oh, okay.
If next time I would do that.
if you're gonna say that such and such a demographic group is votes in a way that you don't like, and that justifies limiting the franchise because of that, you might as well just give up on democracy completely, which I'm sympathetic to. Corporate republicanism as an alternative, as prescribed by Moldbug, among others. Although, I think I said this last time, that there is a type of democracy that I would be sympathetic to, like Swiss kind of democracy, where everything's done very locally, and the people who decide the questions that go on the ballot papers are chosen from the local community. And you just vote directly on policy initiatives, referenda, basically. Direct democracy as opposed to representative democracy, which I'm actually sympathetic to that style of government. So
Like I am basically very like not really sure about that because like I like heard that like they were gonna vote if they're gonna end the draft, and then women voted to not end it, and the rationality was because, oh, I like to see a man in uniform, right? They basically, and that is just an example of when people vote on almost anything that affects other people's property rights and your self ownership, right? It is literally a gang rape, right? Everybody thinks that you can vote, on like that people should be subjected to a draft when you aren't. As well, that's like very similar to people should we expropriate these people's property without compensation? It's very similar to like this. Oh, should we have these all the like laws that are discriminating against people, right? That is literally speaking a group of people saying that they are doing the exact same. Those people cannot say that a gang rape would be wrong because that's
yeah,
exactly what you're advocating for. They're literally saying that, oh, if a group of people are more than the other group of people, they should be able to like to destroy that the smaller groups like property and self ownership like completely because democracy, right? And all the people that are like supporting this thing that like it justifies like something are
so
literally
was
supporting a gang rape.
so the justification for keeping the draft was literally, I'd like to see a man in uniform. Like, I hadn't heard that, but like, wow, that's pretty bad.
Well, that's democracy for you. She had a voting right about if all the people that weren't her should be allowed to have their property rights not violated, and that's the reason why violating their property rights. Like if she, for example, were to be gang raped, she can't say that that's wrong because how is that different than what she just did?
Well, yeah, she couldn't say it's wrong and be consistent in a way, right? Unless she has some grand way of explaining it away. But I mean, I
So I
don't think this isn't true in particular though of direct democracy. I don't think.
In all democracies, actually.
Yeah, exactly. But if the question is like comparing this like Swiss style of like very local level direct democracy to, you know, I guess pretty much any other instance of it, arguably I think it would compare favorably for whatever that's
So
worth.
the advantages of it, if I mean, I understand that just superior to the status quo is a pretty low bar, but the advantages that it has are well pretty straightforward. I think if it's local, then it means that the only people who are voting on the proposal are going to be the people who are actually affected by it in the local community, at least most of the time. The draft will obviously be an exception to that, I guess, because that's strongly cleaves in a certain direction based on gender in the community. But for the most part, the people voting would be the people who actually have skin in the game, so to speak. So that's one advantage that it has. And then the other one is just that because it's
direct democracy instead of party democracy, you don't have to go through all the rigmarole of representatives and charlatans who have to supposedly represent your views for you. You just vote directly on policy initiatives, and that's what goes on the voting paper. So, in other words, do you want X number of immigrants to come into this town, or do you not want this? Yes or no? And that's basically how everything will be done. And I kind of like that idea.
I mean, like, it's of course better to do status quo, and that's like the only threshold we need to reach. But it's like that also hinges on the average person isn't an idiot. And if I hear a lot of people believes in Switzerland and other countries, I might add, then the average person's opinion about these things is like extremely skewed because they are like, well, as we said before, and just believe what is socially convenient, right? And if that is like voted on, then it kind of like destroys the purpose of this, right? But of course, it's better, right? But this is just like the problem with all this. If it happened, it actually from the video directed about against ᴅᴏᴡᴍ, which is one of my favorites, right? Videos, right? Is that it doesn't not gonna work to do what's best for the people if they're educated by a bunch of communists in the public school system. Like that's not like that's the problem with this public school system as it is in most countries, right? It's horrible. Like
I mean,
they're a bunch of communism.
Don't you think the issue more than intelligence is like skin in the game? So like the kind of thing I'm talking about is a community of really dumb whites in some, I don't know, like an underclass area where nobody's worked in 20 years or whatever, a post-industrial town, that kind of place. Those people are pretty dumb, but they experience the negative effects of immigration firsthand, and therefore will oppose it because they're actually exposed to the effects of it. Whereas rich people who are maybe smarter, more educated, well-to-do people, lawyers and so on, they don't have that same skin in the game because they live in their gated communities or whatever. So, yeah.
I guess you have a very good point there because I think that we're talking about different levels of stupidity. Like you're talking about dumb people, and I was like referring to astronomically stupid people. Like two example people, and like they had in Switzerland, they basically want to make regret rape, and so many people were like willing to vote for that, even some men, right? Another example would be in South Africa, where someone was literally have their family, they were literally attacked by a man, like personally victimized, right? By not just by law, but like in like direct actions, like robbed or like hurt, whatever, by a person of a political party, right? And they also did policies that they know was bad. And it's like, oh, but I'm still gonna vote for him because this party did good things in the past, and we need to remain our loyalty. And I've seen that sentiment echo with people in the Labour to support the Labour Party in the UK, right? And people in for Democrats, they say, oh, we are always voted for, and Sweden too, right? We're always voted for this party, right? And for this thing. So therefore, we need to keep doing that. And that's like, then you have like an even lower level of stupidity, right? And that is also why direct democracy could be in many cases better, because you remove the party loyalty from the system. Unless it's a party, unless depending on what party proposes the proposal. They say, oh, this party needs to be loyal to that, so I'm gonna vote for it irrespective of what I actually think. They might think it's bad, but they might vote for it anyway because of party loyalty. And that's like even dumber, right? And those dumb people exist in too much numbers. And that's the reason why we can't have a welfare state. Another reason why we can't have a welfare state.
Yeah, I mean, there's also the other way to create skin in the game, which I've talked about, or a way of forming a parallel society, which is to have a state that just runs like a business. It's called corporate republicanism, and a corporate republic, basically you just so nobody demands that CEOs be put in place democratically, or that it be subjected to the whims of the entire population. So instead of having a monarch or a prime minister or something, you'd have the CEO in your society, your private law society, as Hopper would say. And the people with voting rights, just the same as in a company, would be the shareholders. And then instead of having citizens, you would instead have customers who would come into your society. And the the government, that this corporate style of government would have an incentive to make the society good and of a high living standard for the same reason that companies normally have an incentive to produce good customer service, basically, because it's how they make their money.
No, that actually works very well because I used to live in South Africa. That's actually very, very common to do that in South Africa, and that's probably the reason why I like the country. No, not the country, but I like that exists in the country. With like corporate republic in South Africa is actually more common than what people might believe. So that is actually a very good idea, and it does work. We have seen it work in real time. I know that it works. Like I have proof, like first-hand experience of it working. So you're right. That would be perfect. The problem is just the state fucking up everything, but like the corporate republics, like it's actually a very good idea, definitely, and it is feasible. I've seen it happen.
I don't
So,
know. I like better the perpetual martial law military state. I thought that one was much more comically like masculine, and I think that one's much better than the corporate republicanism.
No, you said that I've seen it. I'm not saying it's optimal. I'm saying that I've seen that happening in the real world.
No, I'm sorry. I'm just like kind of joking. But no, that's. But one thing I wanted to mention too was oh, what was it? Oh yeah, this is backtracking just a little bit. Oh, I spaced it. Sorry. Give me a minute. I mean, not literally. Like, it just has to come back to me. Oh, that's right. I think that it's very tempting to always prescribe, like, everyone's too dumb, because in theory, if people were smarter, right, that then you'd think, oh, then everything would work. So I think that there's almost every situation you always imagine, oh, if everyone were just smarter in this situation, right? All things being equal, but we just, like, sprinkle a few IQ points on the crowd, things will work out better. Because I think very often that's true for a lot of situations, right? But yeah, I think it does make sense that there's an incentive problem, because even very dumb, very incompetent knuckle-dragging people can accomplish very remarkable things, and yeah, the incentives carry a lot of the knowledge for them. They're kind of a great equalizer in that way, assuming they're not corrupted.
Yeah.
But I will say, yeah, there is definitely a distinction though between kind of like a working class, quote unquote, dumb, right? And the kind of dumb that votes for like insane policies. But the interesting thing is that the latter group is largely, made up of like college educated people. So they're not dumb in a very conventional sense, or at least in the sense of like being able to recite facts and navigate an academic system. Which, like, there's definitely people that are, they don't have that mental capacity to do that thing, right?
It's like, I mean, they're intelligent enough to be able to comprehend, like, an abstract description of how the world works vis-a-vis, well, in the style of progressivism or whatever. But they're not intelligent enough to, I guess, do any of their own thinking, or just not adventurous enough, I guess.
Or there's just not a value proposition, right?
Yeah. And, like, there's no real incentive for people to defend right-wing views, because, like, if you defend right-wing views in a serious way, you can have all kinds of horrible consequences thrust upon you. You can get kicked out of your job or rendered potentially unemployable for your entire life, as happened to Count Dankula, for example.
And Dankula's what, marginally right wing at best.
I was gonna say.
Yeah, I mean, because economically speaking, I don't recall him. He seems to kind of get it, right? He seems to get it well enough that like he'd be more inclined towards like right wing conservatism, but he doesn't at all seem like diehard free market or anything.
I was listening to Millennial Woze's most recent interview with him.
Was it like a millennial thing?
Yes, yeah, he went on his channel over Christmas sometime, like in the last week of 2020, and he said that he would be up for more decentralization, basically. So like greater states' rights or just local council government, I guess, in the British case. And Woes asked him if he'd be up for abolishing national government altogether. He asked Dankula that, and Dankula hesitated for a long time. He said, "I'm not an ANCAP, but I want more decentralization." So he seems to be. I think he described himself as being kind of a minarchist. So yeah, yeah. Anarcha-feminism. That's interesting. Uh, have you ever met a person like that? Or someone who professed that? Okay. Okay. Yeah. So it's yeah. Well, we didn't come from chimpanzees either. We just share an ancestor with them. But yeah, it's like uh the problem with military government, just going back to what you were saying, um, stratocracies have a tendency to become very staid because the state fills up with these kind of like class 2 residues, or the lions in Machiavelli's typology. Um, and they have very masculine values, and they're good at basically keeping the society together in times of crisis, or, well, war, obviously, in the case of a military government. But outside that, it's just not very effective because they're too a bit too conservative, I guess, too averse to change. Um, so you want the elite to have a balance of class 1 and class 2 residues. Um, Otherwise, it starts to eat itself. The problem we have is an overabundance of class 1 residues.
Wait, we didn't clarify that terminology earlier, did we? Class 1 and Class 2 residues loosely correlated to progressives, which were like foxes,
I mean,
and conservatives, which were like lions. I know that's kind of
yes.
mixing a few things, but that's kind of a rough lay of the land.
No, that's fine. We're just like basically converting from Machiavelli's typology to Pareto's. Um, Machiavelli used these animal metaphors, and Pareto just talked about classes. Um, Not in the sense of like economic class, but just basically a type of human being, a certain personality type.
Yeah, I
And
think that
like,
should
I
have just
think
stuck with the animals. I think.
Yeah, I think Charlemagne has, okay, so I'll stick to the animal typology, which Charlemagne didn't do, but he gave an interesting historical example, or two, that an example of a society that had too many foxes basically in its ruling class was ancient Athens, and then on the flip side, the a society with too many lions in its ruling elite would be something like Sparta. Um, very well, yeah. They both, their societies both collapsed for different reasons. corresponding to the characteristic.
Sorry, you cut out, at least on my end, for the last like 5 seconds. You said characteristics.
Yeah, it's just Athens and Sparta, their societies both collapsed, and in both cases it was the collapse was a reflection of the character of the elites in those societies, and that's the point that that I've been like hammering home recently with all this elite theory stuff, is that that real change basically comes from the top down, and political change happens because the elite decide they want to establish something, not because the masses want it.
Right. See, but this is the thing, though. It's like, so this is kind of just in some ways a bit of a more complicated way of getting around to a conclusion that is actually not that unpalatable to most people. There's this like weird contradiction where people simultaneously understand and like they get their vote doesn't matter. They understand that they don't really have any political power. That in order to get anywhere in politics, it has to be the right issue at the right time in the right area, and then you have to input your inordinate amount of effort for it all to work out, right? It has to be all of those things happening. You can't just like will any particular bong hit fucking theory of politics to happen, right? So what ends up happening is everybody understands this. They understand it's a fucking sham, but then simultaneously, like when the Capitol gets stormed, right? People take their selfies and they stay within the velvet ropes, and it's all awful. And AOC's shoes get stolen, which is amazing. I mean, I disavow, but it's amazing. So that happened, and then
Yeah.
they're clutching pearls over how their democracy is in shatters, and this is horrible. This is the death of a nation. 1-6 is the new 9/11. Literally, it was like some people's rallying cry. 1-6 is the new 9/11. Like the most outrageous take you could possibly have. But like that's the people of like they double think like both minds, right? It's absolutely bonkers.
Well, not just the
And now we
left-wing
can prove it a
establishment,
whole nother
but,
way that like yeah, it is just this the elites determine your society. I get that a portion of this is they're using democratic mechanisms as like part of the scheme, right? But
yeah.
I mean, I don't know how important that distinction is to.
But they also use the mainstream media to like lie to people, and people are stupid enough to believe it.
Yeah.
And I mean,
I
people
don't
that are
know if,
stupid enough to believe the media, they just deserve to suffer and die. I'm sorry, but fuck them. Really, they're
I
literally.
mean, I don't know if sorry, go on.
But they're literally voting for stuff that are harmful for other people. Like it's not. Like, I don't really like how much empathy for them. Like that makes sense.
No, wait, but here's
Yeah,
the
I mean,
thing.
that's
No,
why
but this goes back to what we had earlier, where like, are people stupid or are the incentives wrong? Like when people believe the MSM's lies, it doesn't directly hurt them. I mean, it kind of does, right? From like a like capitalism lifts all boats sort of a standard, sure, right? But in terms of like the immediate negative impact of government, they're on the immediate gratification end typically, right? So it hurts other people, right? And it's actually just an issue of the incentives being put wrong, right?
But
well,
when
the
they do
problem it's both. So like there is a problem of like some people are less susceptible to brainwashing from the top down, or they're more conspiratorially minded, so they question the established narrative. But I think I mentioned this before, that there's this problem of even among those contrarian people, there's just this huge mass of people, like the kind of people who were attracted to Q, which was very clearly an op from the top down. I'm pretty convinced. They don't respond to the elite narrative in the way that they're supposed to, but they also just don't seem to have the wherewithal or the intelligence to navigate counter narratives effectively, alternative narratives. And that's why you literally Brandon Adamson said this in a recent tweet. It's one of the most depressing things about Twitter is that you realize just how easy it is to lead and misdirect people, the masses, and you really do have to just like
if you want them to be agents for change, social change, you basically do have to lead them around like lemmings, and just tell them what to think, what to feel, while, I guess, satisfying their egos to a certain extent. So you don't want to tell them straight up that we're just giving you these ideas and we expect you to listen. You have to give them the illusion of choice, but effectively it still happens in a very top-down fashion. And if you don't do it, then your enemies will, basically. So, and the premise of the Rats of Nationalism, that book, is just about how there are so many different competing interests that are constantly like vying for the attention of the masses on the internet, and it's so easy for government bots or federal agents to get in there and start posing as counter-revolutionaries or anti-establishment and start misdirecting people into things that are just destructive and serve no real purpose, like Q, for example, that you just shouldn't even really bother. Populism itself is kind of hopeless for that reason. You just have to just go independent and start forming parallel institutions. And then you can't have a normie-free society. Like, you can't have a society without the masses. They are kind of a necessary evil in that respect, because you need people to clean the toilets and to fix the electrical stuff and whatever, all these different niches that the masses do fill in society despite their shortcomings. But there's no real point in trying to lead them, because misdirecting them is so easy. You just need to go off on your own, form your own parallel society and institutions, and then if what you create is good, if it has a really good quality of life, standard of living, institutions and whatever, and if it looks like it'll be a nice place to live, then normies will just be attracted to that. They'll vote with their feet and they'll just come and start living in your society. And that's the avenue that you have to take instead of trying to make a populist revolution, so to speak.
No, exactly,
sorry, I
and
know
this
that
is
was-
a yeah, but this is the classic thing that people talk about, which is outgrowing the state, because government provided services became a synonym for shitty, right? Government phones, right? Your Obama phone, it means a shitty phone. Like any number of things you add government to it, it colloquially has a meaning of shitty, and it gained that naturally. It gained that because like the government just naturally was shitty compared to what the market had. And people acknowledge that, right? Like that's just from experience, and it's just to tie it all back to everything. Like this kind of is the conclusion, is that it all goes back to agorism, because another appeal to agorist, which is the solutions to problems that are going to reject or at least not involve politics or the state, is that all of these like stupid fed gay ops, they're all political. Like they can't present a non-political one. You know what I mean? Like how, what are they gonna like disrupt you by getting you to like stock up on some canned foods, right? That are either gonna be useful later or much later. You know what I mean? Right? like all of these misdirections. I mean, I'll read Brandon Adamson's book and I'll be looking out for any exceptions to this rule. But my assumption going into it is that it's going to be all things that bait people who are very politically minded, and I think that's a great challenge. People who identify as so-called libertarians, but they're incredibly politically minded. And it's just the process of breaking that framework. Where I guess this stream overall, I wouldn't say it's non-politically minded, but it was kind of kept towards the theory. We're not so much concerned with like day-to-day politics, right, in a traditional sense.
I think,
right, and I think that's where the trap is.
I think I can explain why they have to have political solutions to everything. Because if something is ethical, or something is like forever, right? Then that would actually be an anarchist solution, right? And everything works naturally. Like if something works, and it works naturally without the government, right? So when they basically are playing, you need government, right? What they are literally doing is they're saying that these things cannot function on themselves. We need to have it helped by something else, right? We need the government help to do this because the market cannot do it on itself. Like because like government assistance is basically like being on life support rather than to be able to exist on your own, right? And the reason why they propose government solutions is because they are knowing that their policy, that their ideas would not happen naturally or are natural. Well, and if, all frankly, unethical and all frankly, just not good ideas, right? And the reason why they admit that, they have to say, "Oh, we need a government," because then these ideas would be established, right? Because they cannot be established by themselves. And because they are stupid, that's the reason why they say that. You get it?
Yeah, no, I see that. So okay, here's what I want to do. I think we're kind of rounding out this topic here, which is kind of the main meat of the stream. We've just hit the 2 hour mark. I have a couple of items, which they're pretty small items, so I anticipate it won't be very long to go through these two things. But before we transition into those, I guess anything else before we move on to that? No? Because I think we each kind of had our spiels, but sorry.
What? Just I think I was gonna respond to what were you saying just before Jay Willie last spoke? Like, what was the last thing you said? If you can remember, like, just in
Yeah,
brief.
no, I had two main points. The first one was what was the first one was just the natural appeal of agorism, kind of just echoing what you had said. Outgrowing the state because the state's shitty, and like, all you need to do is show, don't tell. But then the second point, which is I think the one you're referring to, is the one that when you pursue non-state solutions, it also gives you a natural immunity, or at least it takes you out of the limelight of where these like gay ops Fed posters can target you, because all of their traps, I'm gonna guess, involve political minded things. It involves political solutions and those kinds of combinations, maybe, if that's the
Well,
appropriate use.
yeah, yeah, combinations, formulas, schemes, basically managerial schemes and formulas. It's basically all the same thing. But what I was gonna say is um, I think, well, you know what the Hansonian explanation would be of why people talk so much about politics every day, like policy and so on, is just the signaling theory that basically people want to show off. I was reading, like, I think it was Spandrel, who is in part of NRX, and he did an interview where he was talking about bio-Leninism, which was originally his idea. He coined the term and everything. And he lives in China. And he was saying that something that he really appreciates about Asians, there are lots of things that he doesn't like about Asian culture as a Westerner, just because it's so alien to him. But he said that he likes just how cynical and goal-directed they are, and he likes the way that politics just isn't something that anybody talks about in Asia unless you actually work in politics or the media or something like that. And even then, he said, if you talk about anything in Asia outside something that directly affects you or something that you can affect, something that's basically goes beyond just immediate gossip or how you're making money or this kind of thing, you'll be immediately met with responses like, well, so what? Or what's your point? What's it to you? There's a really common expression in Japanese for when you use some uncommon word, which is like the English translation. Obviously, it's something like, you just wanted to use that word. The implication being, you know that none of this is ever really going to amount to anything, and that you're basically just using it as an excuse to show off your knowledge. And I think that's what a lot of it's why so many people in the West like feel this compulsion to have this really strong opinion on everything, from the price of bread to the Israel-Palestine conflict.
Well, yeah, and I think a huge part of that has to do with the culture that you foster in a democratic society, because we're taught that the greatest virtue is to go and protest, and that voting is like a sacred civic duty and everything, right? Like we're kind of celebrated for being loudmouths. So I think it's perfectly in character for the West, and in particular for the U.S., right? To be that like bossy and opinionated, and so what if it doesn't immediately impact me? How dare you say I'm not entitled to an opinion, right?
Yeah, it's like I saw this. I sent you this account on Twitter. It was just like, just you know how there are these accounts that are just like it's one leftist cliche after the other. Like you could literally have designed the account based on some sort of algorithm that's designed to spit out leftist cliches. It's like
Oh
this.
yeah, I don't remember which one it is because I know we've traded a few of these back and forth.
Yeah, this 20-year-old woman with like a photo of herself in a CD bar with her tits out.
I
And
think
like,
that we should gather all these up for a stream, and then we should have a cyberbullying stream, and I'll stream it not on
Yeah.
YouTube because that's against the rules.
but she was like that kind of a character, and she had a tweet where she was going on about the trolley problem and about how morally righteous her opinion on the trolley problem. It's like, oh yeah, wow, that's great, sweetheart. Yeah, the trolley problem, that thing that everybody talks about in like, I don't know, first year philosophy courses in moral philosophy, which is like probably the most cancerous area of the discipline. And
I'm
you
sure
can
she
tell,
cracked that one right open.
yeah, and you can tell she must have just felt great, like given herself like a good old pat on the back for pontificating about the trolley problem on Twitter.
You know what we should do is we should collect all of these Twitter accounts, and then on Father's Day visit each of them.
Good idea. Oh, and the one other thing I wanted to say before you moved on is that I mean, there's probably not enough for it to be an entire stream, but like, when you read Brandon's book, do you want to do like a segment talking about it or reviewing it?
Absolutely. Although another one too is I'd like to do one on Konkin's book. I'll send you the link to that, and I'll see if I can get you and Jay Willie to listen through to it. But it's not super long.
Okay.
Because you might be surprised. You might listen to it and then you'd come away and say, "Oh my God, I guess I'm libertarian. I guess I'm ANCAP now. I guess I'm ANCAP agorist."
Yeah.
Decisively.
Well, you know I'm sympathetic to it anyway, especially Agorist.
Yeah, I guess it wouldn't be that huge of a leap.
Institutional
But it does
parallelism.
it dovetails with this conversation, so there might be some interesting overlap. I need to give it another listen because it's been a few months.
So you said there was some final series of like stuff that you wanted to. I
had two items. So the first one is this tweet. Give me 1 second. Okay. I mean, it's nothing meaty. It's just this Twitter. Wait, why is it only the image? Oh, anyway, somebody tweeted these two images, right, of Melania and Jill Biden, and said, "Guess which one has a doctorate?" But like, if you just look at these pictures, like, it's obvious that. Like, do you think Melania looks bad here? Like, Melania's a fucking badass. You can't see she's wearing these, like, red glasses also. The photo's absolutely fucking ridiculous. But she's, like, sitting in a jet on a little sofa in a private jet that has a carpet in, like, the most ridiculous outfit that's, like, plunging so her titties are hanging out and her six-pack. And there's just a chest open full of fucking watches, just sparkling expensive watches. It's absolutely over the top.
Yeah, that's interesting. So who's the woman on the right?
That's Jill Biden. That's Joe Biden's wife.
She looks younger than him.
Yeah, I'd say so. But anyway, this is just a classic thing. Like, the left, they can't resist slut-shaming Melania. And, of course, people immediately point that out. And, the original poster, this guy who identifies as, proudly light-skinned or whatever, or openly light-skinned is like in his name. And he's talking about how like Melania's a racist and she put Mexicans in cages, so we're allowed. And I think that's just a nice, nice example of I guess this would be the emotional intelligence section of it, but I think it was a man who tweeted this.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Didn't have much to say. The meteor item had to do with Jared Holt. Did you hear about the Jared Holt news?
No,
This is
I
some
forget
hot
who that
goss.
is.
So Jared Holt is just a massive wiener. He's like a full-time snitch, and he just loves to bitch about how everyone is an anti-Semite and just goes around just being a cry-bullying, pussy, awful person. He's just insufferable. And now apparently there's dirt on him that's come out. All of the bullshit he cancels everyone else over, right? He's the prom queen of fucking cancel culture. And it turns out he has like a massive history of Facebook posts being anti-gay, which is funny.
Wow.
He literally makes a living
Yeah.
by... Oh, this is old. This is from 2019. Well, it's news to me. Did you guys know about this? This is funny as hell.
Did you hear about, I think it was Ricky Vaughn potentially facing 10 years in jail for trolling or whatever?
No. What?
Well, since you haven't heard of it, I'm gonna have to... Oh, that was easy. Here you go. Oh, sorry, I put it in Shill and Discuss. Go to Shill and Discuss.
That technically would be the correct channel for it.
Yeah.
Wow, the one time Brandon Adamson's tweet isn't about going to Walmart, I miss it, and it's something like this. I haven't heard of Ricky Vaughn, though. I don't... Is that just... Do we know about him before?
I'd only vaguely heard of him, but apparently, according to this Brandy Zadrozny person, he's a, quote, notorious troll and white nationalist charged with election interference for, quote, disseminating misinformation designed to deprive individuals of their constitutional right to vote. And he's facing 10 years in prison for it.
Oh, you know what? I actually did hear about this. I did hear about this vaguely. I think what it was what was it? The master plan was to like I think it had to do with like robo dialing people in certain areas so that it would disproportionately affect particular demographics, and then to try to like convince them that it was like the wrong day of the voting, or it might have been like posing as the opposition and then being super obnoxious or something. Like it was something like ridiculous like that had to do with calling people. If it's the same thing I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds
don't
like the
think it's
guy
worth
was being
10.
I was just gonna say, it sounds like the guy might have been being a piece of shit, but of course all they care about is, oh my god, he is a white nationalist.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, I don't know how much more to say about it, except that it's the elite starting to, I guess, show their hand in new and creative ways. So...
I could see someone trying to make the free speech case here, but I think that's a bit tenuous.
Yeah. I don't know much about it. I just heard about it from Brandon. So yeah, was there something else that you were gonna... I don't know.
Oh, I just looked at this Jared Holt post. I definitely have seen this one before. There's this thing he posted about how freshmen aren't cool, which is super fucking funny. Just like it's just like really cringy, but it's also old news. It's from 2009, but
Can see it. It does look a little bit cringy. I love how there's an NRA advert in the top right.
yeah, right. Well, I think big league politics is not exactly unbiased news, so full disclosure there. Big league.
Yeah. I just thought of bigly when Donald Trump would say that.
Yeah, me too. That's what I'm thinking of. I think it has to be related. Well, I think that's all I got for this stream.
Think in total, like for this stream and last, like I wrote 7,000 or 8,000 words combined from this stream and the last one.
Yeah, and sorry about losing the other one. This one, the audio should be a lot better.
No,
though.
it's alright. It's just...
But I think a lot of it was recapped here. I also did include the link to that Charlemagne's video. I added that to the description of this one. But I think like a lot of things that become like a lot of things that become like big topics, usually it becomes like a reoccurring thing that gets referenced back to. So I'm sure it'll be revisited and kind of fleshed out over time. So
yeah. So like a lot of people are put off from reading people like Pareto and like Machiavelli directly, these sorts of the foundations of elite theory, because they use language in a fucking weird way a lot of times, like the residues and the combinations and all that. I don't know if it's because it's like unwieldy translation or something, because it was originally written in another language, and maybe there's like a more elegant way of expressing what he was trying to say in Italian or something.
I kind of like it though. I like combinations.
Yeah.
I like that it's a technically neutral way of referring to things that are like a plan and a scheme, but it could be either. But you know what I mean? Like I like this nice broad term for it.
Yeah, it's excellent.
Combinations. But the residues, that confuses me, because with a residue you think of like there's a main chunk of a thing, and then some event, something happens or something changes, and then you have like a diaspora, and that would be the residue, right? Or something left behind even, right? Like that would be the visual I get with a term like residue, right? That it was formerly part of something larger that it's separate from, but I think that obviously is way too loaded and doesn't fit.
Yeah, it's the other way round. The way it's used in Pareto's typology is that residues are things that are fixed in society, or things that are that stay constant for a long time.
So it's almost like a stain.
Yeah. That doesn't have the same nice mental image to it, I guess.
As residue? I don't know. No, maybe not. Referring to people as stains, I guess that is a little bit... Well, on that note, I'm going to wrap this one up. And I scheduled another stream for around the same time, but lately my schedule is still open. I'm hoping that'll change, but I don't know. I guess we'll see what happens.
Yeah, you'll probably have finished Brandon's book by then, because it's like a very quick read. It's only like 100 pages or something.
Okay, that might take me a few weeks. No, I can read 100 pages. It's been a minute, but I can read 100 pages.
That would only take me a few hours. I think it only took me a few hours the first time I read it, but okay.
I know, well, I consume almost everything by just translating it to voice to text and then listening to it, but that's usually not as thorough.
Yeah, isn't that awkward sometimes, because the text to voice pronounces things in weird ways?
Yeah, but sometimes that's fun. That was actually very amusing with John Stoltenberg's book, especially the very racy parts of it.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
I can't really remember. Okay, I'm gonna have to head off anyway, so... Right.
Alright, well, thanks for dropping by, and thanks to everyone in the chat. And everybody keep it easy, and put the word to the mother, and